Maximillionaire here, and welcome to the Tao of Bao Part 5, The Arrest. Now, besides the arrest, we're also going to cover the statute that Bao is being charged with, and we're going to show why this statute does not apply to Bao and what he did. But not only that, we're also going to look at the constitutionality of this statute and show why it may be very likely that it's unconstitutionally vague. And we will also show that it is most definitely unconstitutional as applied to Bao. As we saw in the previous episodes, Judge George Gallagher, the shock collar judge, issued a warrant for Bao's arrest on Friday, May 11th. On Tuesday, May 15th, Bao was back at the Crowley court. He was planning on doing some recording of the building, and he went across the street to grab a bite to eat and live streamed while he was doing it. The Crowley PD are subscribed to Bao, and they watch his videos, and they were seeing him live stream, and they realized that he was across the street. So they sent some of their goons over to arrest him. Let's take a look.
Sarah Perez says, Tay, smoochy face. New South Canuck says, order extra, I'm hungry, LL. Yeah. 5 Point says, hey, Bao, what's up? What is going on? We are across the street from the courthouse, or this building that they call it courthouse. I'm grabbing some lunch. We're going to go back around and scout out the logistics that's in the area and see what they're doing. Mexican Blue says, I might go audit Broadway Bank today. 5 Point says, what's up, bro? What is going on? 5 Points, welcome to the stream. No Bullshit says, oh yes, they said come back today for complaint form. Taylin says, hey 5. Hey Tay says 5. Rico says, I do no such thing, Bao. Smoochy, blushy face. I would never try to make you look horrible. Well, yeah, you don't have to do that. I do a pretty good job on my own, right, Rico? Boomer says, hey, Bao. How are you? Thank you so much. Can I get some of those fresh lasers on the side, please? Alright, guys. Lunch is here. I gotta grab a quick drink and it's gonna be on. This is what it looks like. This is how it came out. What do you guys think? This is what I'm gonna be, that's what I'm gonna be eating.
They didn't even give Bao a chance to eat, even though they knew from his live stream that he was coming over to the Crowley court right after this meal.
I figured we do the same to them, you know what I mean? Rika says happy face, happy face. The biggest says ask for some chinchillas. Lava Attraction says Mexican Padilla versus Rasa.
Hey,
What's up, Morris? What's up, man?
Hey, man, go ahead and do me a favor. Go ahead and stand up for me.
What's up?
Okay. You got it. Got a warrant for you, okay? Just go ahead and stand up for me.
Alright, guys, I'm in the middle of eating. They've just caged me.
Alright, go ahead and do me a favor. Sit that down.
So,
Would you stand up, please, sir?
Go ahead and set that down real quick. You can face it to us if you want.
alright,
I
guys.
don't want you to damage the drink.
I'm in a little bit of trouble.
Sir, go and stand up for us, please.
Go ahead. I'll place your hands on the back.
His bond was set at $2,500. So this is what happens when a judge gets pissed off at you.
And it's not that the judge is telling me to.
Now let's look at Texas Penal Code 42.07, harassment that Bao is being charged with. He is being charged with section A1, 4, and 7. It says, a person commits an offense if, with the intent to harass, annoy, alarm, abuse, torment, or embarrass another, the person, 1, initiates communication and, in the course of that communication, makes a comment, request, suggestion, or proposal that is obscene. Now, here they're referring to that several people use the word bitch and cunt. Now, it could be argued, possibly, that Bao initiated the communications by telling people to call up. But he did not make the communication, so he could not, therefore, in the course of the communication, make a comment that was obscene. Somebody else made that comment. He never asked anybody to make an obscene comment, so therefore he did not initiate any obscene comment. Number 4, causes the telephone of another to ring repeatedly or make repeated telephone communications anonymously or in a manner reasonably likely to harass, annoy, alarm, abuse, torment, embarrass, or offend another. Okay, again, did Bao cause the telephone of another to ring repeatedly or make repeated telephone communications? Possibly. He asked people to call, but did that mean he made the telephone ring repeatedly or make repeated telephone communications? No, each person made one telephone communication. So wouldn't that mean that an individual person would have to make repeated telephone communications? It's not repeated if different people each make one telephone communication. Number 7, sends repeated electronic communications in a manner reasonably likely to harass, annoy, alarm, abuse, torment, embarrass, or offend another. Again, did he send repeated electronic communications via telephone? No, he didn't. Other people did. He asked people to call. He asked people to express their constitutional right to seek redress. He asked people to apply public pressure. But all of these would have been covered under the First Amendment. So, under the letter of the law, it must be a person that is making repeated phone calls. It must be a person that is making an obscene comment. And it must be a person that makes repeated electronic communications. That's the letter of the law. What was it Josh White said about the letter of the law?
But here's where the kicker comes in. Because the people that were elected made the statute that said during an election process, you are not allowed to visually or audio record within 100 feet of a polling place, which is what is right across the hall, well within 100 feet. It doesn't say if there are walls that separate you or if you're in a different part of the building.
Well, wait a minute here. Nowhere in the statute does it say that one person could be blamed for 100 different people making a call, and that could be counted as repeated calls by one person. Nowhere in this statute does it say that the words that one person used in a phone call could be used and blamed on another person. Well, I guess sticking to the letter of the law only matters when you want it to, and when it doesn't suit your needs or the judge's needs, then you can interpret it any way you want to. Let's look at the constitutional ramifications of this thought process that they're going under here. Under their concept, that means anytime somebody tells people to call their congressman and let them know that they're outraged about something, now all of a sudden they're harassing somebody? Now all of a sudden they're responsible for every word that somebody uses once they make that phone call, or the manner in which they make that call? Obviously, this kind of interpretation would be entirely unconstitutional. Now, I'm going to make a personal plea to Bao. please do not argue jurisdiction. Please do not argue whether or not they have proof that these statutes apply to you. Because I'm going to give you 3 great constitutional arguments that you can make. And I'm going to go from the weakest to the strongest. But these are all 3 excellent arguments that you should be able to make and win at least on 2, if not all 3. The first argument is the statute is unconstitutional for vagueness. Now, I put this as the weakest argument because this argument has both won and lost there in Texas in the appeals court. And I'll explain that further here. The second argument would be it's unconstitutional for overbreadth. It covers too much. It encroaches into free speech. The third argument, which is the strongest argument, is that this statute is unconstitutional as applied to you. In the case of Kareneff v. Texas in 2008, the Court of Appeals there in Fort Worth did find that Section 7 of this statute, which is one of the ones that Bao is being charged with, was unconstitutional on its face for vagueness. And now this did get overturned by the Circuit Court of Appeals, but not based upon anything wrong in the argument or the decision, but only on the technicality that he didn't bring up this argument soon enough. In order for a law to not be void for vagueness, it is well established that criminal laws must be sufficiently clear in at least 3 respects. First, a person of ordinary intelligence must be given a reasonable opportunity to know what is prohibited. Second, the law must establish determinate guidelines for law enforcement. And third, where the First Amendment freedoms are implicated, the law must be sufficiently definite to avoid chilling protected expression. In deciding this case, the court also quoted another case in the Fifth Circuit called Kramer. And they say that the more important item, rather than notice of the person, is giving notice to law enforcement. It says the requirement that a legislature establish minimal guidelines to govern law enforcement. Where the legislature fails to provide such minimal guidelines, a criminal statute may permit a standardless sweep that allows policemen, prosecutors, and juries to pursue their own personal predilections. Well, isn't that exactly what happened here? A judge and a policeman pursued their own predilections. Now, there are 2 reasons why the court found this unconstitutional for vagueness. And one of them is because they didn't have the reasonable person standard. That wasn't in there. And the second is because some of the words like annoy and alarm were vague. They weren't well defined. Those words still remain in this statute, even though they've added a reasonable standard. So annoy and alarm may be still considered constitutionally vague. Now here's where we get to the overbroad argument, because it says here in the same ruling that even if they did add a reasonable person standard, which they did, that it still probably would not survive constitutional scrutiny because it's overbroad. And that overbreadth could have First Amendment ramifications, just as it did in Bao's case. Here it says, the First Amendment does not permit the outlawing of conduct merely because the speaker intends to annoy the listener, and a reasonable person would in fact be annoyed. Many legitimate political protests, for example, contain both of these elements. That's exactly right. Just because you intend to annoy your congressman or your mayor or whoever you're calling of political nature with your speech doesn't make it illegal, and they can't make it so. And that's why, especially as applied, this statute is overbroad, because they're applying it exactly to that freedom of speech. I brought up Kareneff because I feel that they have the best arguments made for the void for vagueness argument, and they have really good citations, really good evidence. But it should be pointed out that Lebo in 2014 did overrule this and declare that on its face that Section 7 of this statute was constitutional. Now, in my opinion, Lebo wasn't very well argued, and an argument still could be made that Section 7 is unconstitutional for vagueness, and an argument could certainly be made for Section 4 under the same grounds, as that determination has never been made. But let's take a look at Lebo and see what they said about some of these items. Even though the Lebo decision upheld the statute on vagueness grounds, they didn't look at the overbroad argument at all. And there is some very good stuff in here that is very pertinent to Bao's case. The court says that in order to run afoul of this statute, that there cannot be any intent to engage in legitimate communication of ideas, opinions, or information, but that basically your intent is simply to harass or inflict emotional distress for its own sake. Bao clearly said that the purpose was to apply public pressure and also to seek redress for grievances from your government. So when people called Darla Peavy a bitch or a cunt, it wasn't just to call her a name, it was your decisions and your legal thoughts are stupid and therefore you're a bitch. That is valid First Amendment speech.
Bao, do your thing. We will do what we can from here. Yeah, there's really nothing you guys can do except for apply public pressure. All right, guys, call up here. Let every single of her neighbors know what she's doing to her friends.
I defy anybody to find anywhere where Bao or the people in chat ever said to harass, annoy, alarm, be mean, anything like that. Back to Lebo. In saying that the statute was constitutional, they said that it is plain on its text what it means. And it says, given that plain text, we believe that the conduct to which the statutory subsection is susceptible of application will be, in the usual case, essentially non-communicative, even if the conduct includes spoken words. That is to say, in the usual case, persons whose conduct violates 42.07 will not have any intent to engage in the legitimate communication of ideas, opinions, or information. They will have only the intent to inflict emotional distress for its own sake. One quick correction before our final point. Lebo only made it to the Court of Appeals. It did not make it up to the Circuit Court of Appeals. So it did not overturn the other precedent, and it's not as high of a precedent as it would otherwise be. This brings us to the final argument that the statute is unconstitutional for vagueness as applied. This makes for a stronger case of void for vagueness, as it says here in Lebo. It says, however, an argument that a statute is unduly vague usually requires a showing that the statute is overly vague as applied to the particular defendant. As noted, Lebo does not make an as-applied argument. An exception to the requirement of an as-applied challenge exists, however, if the statute implicates the First Amendment's guarantee of free speech. Well, this case works both ways. It is unconstitutionally vague as applied, and it implicates free speech. It does both. And might I point out that if this appeals court thinks that the statute is not so vague as to be used for abuse and misused in the wrong circumstances, then how come Bao got arrested? And how come Bao's getting charged with this? Next time on the Tao of Bao Part 6, we're going to be looking at what happened to Bao in Leon Valley. And remember, This is not legal advice because I'm not an attorney. I just play one on YouTube.